If someone asked me to define happiness, I'd show them the photos on my phone. It's a Saturday morning in New York, and Ethan and I are sipping hot coffee at our favorite spot in Soho. He's wearing a gray sweater and black-rimmed glasses, sketching a new idea in his leather notebook. My eyes are glued to his gentle smile, the kind that can melt away any worry. Ethan's a brilliant architect, and I, Claire, am a surgeon. Our life isn't perfect, but it's full. Everything flows like a smooth jazz tune until the day the music suddenly stops. I thought Ethan's recent fatigue was just from work overload. He'd just finished a big project, and we planned to spend the whole month relaxing. But then bruises started appearing, followed by intense stomach pain. As a doctor, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I tried to reassure him, saying it was probably just a virus. But a voice inside me was screaming. That fateful day, we sat in the clinic, the air heavy. The liver specialist, a respected colleague, looked at us with regret in his eyes. He spoke medical terms I use every day, but they sounded strange and cruel. Ethan has a rare liver disease. He needs a transplant immediately. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest, stealing all my air. The room was eerily silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner. I looked at Ethan. He gripped my hand tightly, trying to keep his usual calm, but I knew fear was hiding behind his eyes. He always stayed strong, even in the face of the harshest truth. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask why this was happening to us. But then I remembered Ethan's story. He grew up in an orphanage in Queens, with no blood relatives. He always believed family is something we build, not something we're born with. And I was that family for him. But now, that definition of family became a life or death barrier. The doctor gently said, "We need to find a compatible donor, ideally a family member." In that moment, I felt the world collapse. Ethan had no one. He was completely alone. What I didn't expect was that an old, forgotten story would become our only hope. A small detail in his old file, a faded photo, became the clue that started a race against time. I thought I'd have to fight alone, but then everything changed in a flash. After the initial shock at the clinic, everything felt blurry. I remember driving home like a zombie, but I don't know how I got there. Our Brooklyn apartment, once filled with laughter and the smell of coffee every morning, now felt eerily quiet. Everything in the house was the same: his half-read books, his favorite ceramic mug on the kitchen counter, but they felt strange, distant. It was like fear had taken over our home. Ethan, on the other hand, was unbelievably strong, trying to keep his spirits up. But as a doctor, I couldn't let myself believe blindly like he did. I'd spent my life studying numbers and statistics, and now those numbers haunted me. The success rate for transplants from non-related donors is much lower. Every day I flipped through his medical records, staring at numbers and charts, seeing only one brutal truth: time wasn't on our side. I'd saved countless lives, held a scalpel with absolute confidence, but now, facing the person I loved most, I was completely powerless. Those nights, I lay awake for hours. I pretended to sleep, but I was listening to his breathing, feeling his warmth, and praying. My whole life was built on science and logic, but now I was praying like a desperate woman. I searched medical forums, the latest studies, but they all led to the same cold answer: no miracles. We'd registered with the National Donor System, a long and complex process that I knew could take months, even years. Ethan didn't have that kind of time. Every time I looked at the application, with the words "family donors preferred," my heart twisted. My world shrank to the hospital and our apartments for walls. Friends called, but I brushed them off and hung up. I couldn't stand their pitying looks or empty encouragements. "It'll be okay, Claire," they said, but how could they know? They weren't doctors facing their husband's medical condition every day. One night, Ethan looked at me with tired but loving eyes. "Don't worry too much," he whispered. "We'll get through this." But when he said that, I cried, hot tears streaming down my face. I cried not for him, but for my own helplessness. I wished I could tell him, "I'm a doctor, and I know we're facing a dead end." I was in a place where my career and love collided brutally. Despair consumed me, but deep inside, a small spark still burned. I couldn't give up. I wouldn't give up. After weeks of living in despair, I went through the motions like a machine. I went to work, came home, cooked dinners he didn't want to eat, then sat watching him fall into exhausted sleep. Ethan, always neat and organized, no longer had the energy to tidy his things. One afternoon, while cleaning the closet, I saw an old faded cardboard box tucked deep in the corner. It had no label, but I knew what it was. It was Ethan's memory box from the orphanage. He'd never opened it in front of me. I sat on the floor, took a deep breath, and opened the lid. The smell of old paper of the past hit me. Inside were simple, childish things: a rusty toy car, a worn baseball card, and some scribbled drawings. Each item was a piece of his incomplete childhood, and my heart ached. I wished I could hug that little boy and tell him he'd have a beautiful life. Then, at the bottom of the box, I saw it. A small, faded photo wrapped in thin paper. It was a picture of a young couple, probably from the late 80s or early 90s. The man had slightly curly hair and eyes just like Ethan's, but with a deep sadness. The woman leaned on his shoulder, looking gentle. They weren't rich, their clothes simple, but their smiles for each other were genuine. They stood by an old turquoise pickup truck, and I recognized the setting as somewhere far from New York. A rugged coastline, a weathered wooden house. I stared at the photo. Questions flooded my mind. Who were they? Why did they leave him? Were they still alive? And most importantly, did they have other children? In medicine, we're taught to keep a cool head in every situation. But in that moment, I was just a desperate wife searching for a way out. This small photo, a piece of a past he never spoke about, became the thinnest thread of hope I'd ever had. It was a path I'd never considered, the only thread left to hold on to. I looked at Ethan sleeping, his face tired but peaceful, and I knew I had to find them. I thought helplessness was the worst state, but it wasn't. What came next was determination. Not the determination of a doctor, but of a desperate wife. I realized I couldn't just sit and wait for a miracle from the cold donor system. My only hope was that fragile, almost meaningless old photo. I started my search like a detective. I took a picture of the photo, zooming in on the man and woman's faces, and especially the turquoise pickup truck. I spent countless nights, drinking black coffee, sitting at my computer, searching old social media, local news archives. I used keywords like young couple with a blue pickup truck, Maine coastal town, orphanage Queen's parents. It was like finding a grain of sand in a desert, but after hundreds of hours, I found it. A small post on a local history blog from a coastal Maine town, talking about fishing families who shaped the town. The photo with the post showed an older man by an old truck, but behind him was a small wooden house I was sure I'd seen in Ethan's photo. I called the number on the blog, trembling. It belonged to a woman named Carol, who ran the town's history library. Her voice was warm, like a grandmother's. I told her about the photo, about Ethan, about his illness. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "I know that house. And I know that truck. A man in town named Hayes had one just like it, but it's very old." Her voice wasn't fully confident, but there was a hint of curiosity. "Does Mr. Hayes have a son?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Yes, a son named Liam," she replied, "but he's a private man, hard to talk to." I made up my mind. I lied to Ethan, saying I had to attend a medical conference. He took my hand, gave a weak smile. "Be careful, honey." I couldn't tell him I was starting a crazy journey, a manhunt. The trip from New York to Maine was a complete shift. From skyscrapers and honking cars, I drove onto rocky coastal roads, where the sea wind blew strong and weathered wooden houses dotted the landscape. Each mile fueled my urgency. This wasn't a hopeless trip. It was a mission. I couldn't fail. I'd seen him in the photo. I had to find him. I reached the small coastal town, and I knew this was where it would begin. Or end. After a long drive, I arrived at the small coastal town. Unlike vibrant tourist beaches, this place had the wild, rugged beauty of Maine. The air was thick with the smell of salt and diesel from boats docking. Old wooden houses lined up, painted in dull colors, and I felt the eerie silence of a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. My gut told me this was the place I needed to be. I went to the address Carol gave me, a house on a hill overlooking the sea. But no one was home. Panic set in, wondering if I was chasing a pipe dream. An elderly neighbor pointed toward the harbor, speaking in a thick, raspy local accent. "Liam? He's down at the harbor. He lives there more than at home." I drove to the harbor, my heart pounding like a hammer. I saw him standing there alone. He was fixing fishing nets, hands calloused, face smeared with grease and sea wind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but slightly hunched from hard work. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. As I approached, he turned. I'd prepared for this moment, but it still stunned me. He looked just like Ethan. Same deep blue eyes, same straight nose, same wry smile at the corner of his mouth, but his smile was weathered, tired, like he'd carried the world on his shoulders. He looked at me suspiciously, like I was an alien stepping off a spaceship. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice rough and cold. My heart raced, feeling small and out of place. "Hiya, I'm looking for someone named Liam Hayes," I said, voice shaking. He stared at me, silent. I felt an invisible wall between us, built of doubt and distance. I gathered my courage, pulled out the photo from the memory box, and handed it to him. "This is my husband, Ethan Carter. People say you look like him." He took the photo, stared at Ethan's face, his expression shifting complexly. Confusion, surprise, and something distant, painful. He looked at me again, eyes narrowing with caution. "Who are you to him?" he asked, voice hard. "I'm his wife," I replied. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, turning away. I knew this wasn't a normal meeting. This was a confrontation with a past he didn't want to touch. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. It wasn't a happy phrase. He said it with sarcasm, like he'd heard a bad joke. Liam turned back to his nets, ignoring me. The stench of fish and salty sea clung to the air, a smell I'd never gotten used to. I couldn't give up. I stepped closer, trying to find a way to talk. "Liam, please listen. My husband Ethan is very sick. He needs a liver transplant," I said, voice full of desperation. He stopped, dropped the net, and turned to me, his blue eyes flashing with a coldness I'd never seen in Ethan. "You think I'll believe you? A woman from New York shows up saying I have a long-lost brother? Sounds like some cheesy Hollywood story." I reached out to touch his shoulder, but he stepped back. "Don't touch me," he growled. "You don't know anything about my life." His anger wasn't malice, but the pent-up pain of someone abandoned. He spoke of their parents, how they left. "They ditched us," he said, voice trembling. "They left a few photos and abandoned me to fend for myself. You think I've lived here for decades just for you to show up and talk about a happy family reunion? Life isn't a movie, lady, and I'm not a fool." I was stunned. This wasn't just rejection. It was resentment that had eaten at him for years. He believed their parents abandoned both brothers, and he had no reason to trust in family. To him, I was just a stranger trying to use him. He was a victim of circumstance, too used to loneliness to believe in anything else. I tried to explain that Ethan wasn't bad, that he was a victim too. But he wouldn't listen. "You say he's good, great, successful in New York?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Good for him. What about me? I've struggled my whole life in this town. Now I'm too tired for this." Despair hit me, my hope fading. I knew saying he's your brother wouldn't be enough. I had to make him see he wasn't alone. But how? When he'd built such a strong wall. He turned away, back to his work. "Sorry for wasting your time. Go back to New York," he said, not looking back. His cold voice cut like a knife, and I knew I'd failed, at least in this first talk. I sat in my car for an hour, tears dried up, completely drained. I should go back. I'd tried my best. I'd failed. But looking up, I saw Liam still there, working under the dim sunset. He'd pushed me away, but he was still there. Part of me knew his anger wasn't rejection, but pain. And that pain was a thread connecting the brothers. I decided to try again. I stepped out of the car, this time with only my phone in hand. "Liam," I called. He looked up, still cold but slightly surprised. "I'm not talking about medicine anymore. I'm talking about the man I love." I didn't talk about illness or dead ends. I showed him photos from our wedding album. "This is Ethan on our wedding day," I said, voice trembling. He cried. He said he never thought he'd have a family. I scrolled through more photos, everyday moments, Ethan hugging me in the kitchen, his smile when we went hiking, the way he looked at me after a long day. Liam stood there silent, looking at a life he'd never known. The anger faded, replaced by surprise and something distant in his eyes. Then I stopped at a photo of Ethan gardening, arms bare. I zoomed in and showed it to him. "See this?" I pointed to a small, crescent-shaped scar on Ethan's wrist. I asked him about it once. He said he didn't remember much, just a childhood accident at the beach. Liam looked at the photo, then slowly rolled up his sleeve, and I saw it. An identical scar, same shape, same spot. He looked at his scar, then at the photo, and deep pain filled his eyes. His voice broke. One day, when we were playing on the sand, the waves were strong. I pushed him away from a sharp rock. Another wave hit, and I couldn't reach him. Mom found us both, and then they left. His anger melted, replaced by realization. He remembered. He remembered the little brother he'd tried to protect. The guilt of failing to save him had turned into the truth before his eyes. Now, standing before a desperate woman and photos of a life he'd missed, he understood. He wasn't alone. And Ethan, his brother, wasn't alone either. We stood there, in the cold sea wind, and I knew I'd found him. After leaving the harbor, I drove to a small motel nearby. Despair hit me again. I was crazy to think one photo and a scar could erase decades of resentment. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sea wind whistle through the window, telling myself I'd done all I could. Liam's pain was too big, part of who he was, and I couldn't expect him to give up part of his body for a brother he'd never met. But Liam couldn't sleep either. That night, he wandered the beach, breathing the cold, salty air, trying to piece together his shattered memories. I don't know what he thought, but I'm sure it was a brutal inner battle. Hatred had been his shield, keeping him alive. But now, that shield was cracking. There was a brother out there dying, a victim like him, who never knew he existed. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes, packing to drive back to New York. I'd failed. I was buckling my seatbelt when I heard a soft knock. I opened the door and saw Liam standing there. He didn't speak, just looked into my eyes, no longer cold, still weathered, but now with a spark of compassion I hadn't seen before. "Listen, Claire," he said, voice rough but firm. "I'm not doing this for them." He said them with sarcasm, and I knew he meant their parents. "I'm not doing it for some fairy tale reunion. I'm doing it for my brother." I was speechless. He continued, "We'll need to do the tests. I'll need a flight to New York, and I don't need any handouts. You hear me?" His voice was still tough, but I understood. This wasn't rejection, but acceptance. It was his way of showing care, hard and full of pride. I nodded, tears welling up, but this time from relief, from hope. "Thank you, Liam," I said, voice choking. He nodded, turned, and walked away without another word. I stood there, watching his rugged back, a strong, weathered man. He didn't say a loving word or make promises, but through his actions, he gave me the greatest gift of my life. After leaving the main town, Liam and I drove straight to the airport. The flight to New York was silent. We sat side by side, two different worlds now tied by fate. I looked at Liam, sitting upright, staring out the window, still rough but with incredible resolve. He didn't speak, and neither did I. I knew he was preparing for a life-changing moment. When we reached the hospital, the familiar smell of alcohol and antiseptic hit me. It was where I worked every day, but now it felt different. Liam followed me through long corridors, looking around, out of place in this sterile world. We reached Ethan's room. My heart pounded. I'd waited for this moment, dreamed of it, but now it felt sudden, making me tremble. I stepped in first, giving Ethan a forced smile. He lay in bed, frail, pale, but still managed a tired smile for me. I took his hand, feeling his warmth, gathering courage to speak. "Ethan, someone wants to meet you." He nodded, eyes half closed, as if too tired for anything. I opened the door, signaling Liam to come in. He stepped in slowly, standing at the foot of the bed. Ethan opened his eyes. At first, they were dull, but when he saw Liam, they widened. Disbelieving, I stood there, witnessing a miracle. No greetings, no words. Silence filled the room. Ethan looked at Liam, then at me, as if asking, "Is this real?" Liam stood there, eyes teary, staring at the brother he'd lost and now found in such cruel circumstances. Though they'd never spoken, I felt a wordless conversation happening. A talk of regret, longing, and an unbreakable bond. Liam stepped closer, placing his calloused hand on Ethan's frail one. In that moment, my world came back. Despair faded, Ethan's loneliness ended. The brothers held hands tightly, a grip of recognition, forgiveness, and hope. I stood there, watching two men, one strong, one weak, finally finding each other. I knew the miracle wasn't just saving Ethan's life, but him finding his family when he thought he'd lost everything. I stood there, witnessing a miracle. Ethan and Liam, to strangers, held hands tightly, and a heavy, emotional silence filled the room. I was no longer a helpless doctor or a desperate wife, just a woman seeing a miracle. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks. They were tears of relief, of happiness. Ethan's loneliness, the emptiness he'd carried his whole life, was finally filled. Ethan looked at me, then at Liam, his eyes glistening. You, he whispered weakly, you found me. Liam nodded, gripping Ethan's hand. I'm here now, he said, voice rough but sincere. In that moment, I knew Liam's resentment and pain had melted away. He'd overcome his past too, become a true brother, one who'd fight for his sibling. From that moment, things moved fast. Liam was tested and found to be a perfect match. My medical team worked through the night to prepare for the surgery. As a doctor, I was anxious, but as a wife, I felt a strange peace. Both Ethan and Liam were incredibly brave. Liam looked at me before going into surgery, giving a tired but determined smile. Let's get this done, he said. The surgery took hours. I stood outside watching numbers on screens, telling myself everything would be okay. It was both professional and deeply personal. I'd done hundreds of surgeries, but this was the first time I had two loved ones in the operating room. Everything went well. Both brothers survived. The weeks that followed were a slow but meaningful recovery. Ethan regained his strength. Liam recovered quickly, but the most surprising change was in his heart. He was no longer cold and weathered. He and Ethan started talking. They found common ground, quirky habits only brothers share. They discovered they both sang song lyrics wrong and hated onions. Those small things brought them closer, erasing years of distance. One day, when Ethan was strong enough to sit up, Liam gave him a framed photo. It was the old picture of their parents, restored by Liam. I didn't do this for them, Liam said, but for us, because we deserve to know where we came from. Ethan smiled, tears falling. He was no longer alone. Our story doesn't end with a perfect movie ending, but with a new beginning. Ethan fully recovered. Liam returned to Maine, but he was no longer a lonely man. Every time the phone rang, I knew it was Liam, and I heard peace in Ethan's voice. Family isn't perfect, but it's a miracle we found. For us, it was found in a place no one expected, through a journey of tears and pain, but ultimately rewarded with hope and love.